Hi, this is Jack Dowling with AI Practical Applications, and today we're going to be talking to Tim Imholt. And how I met Tim at a meetup on AI, and we were both interested in a particular thing that somebody was doing with AI. And we attended the meetup, and we met there, and had some very interesting conversations during the meetup, and then got together for coffee afterwards, got to know each other, and I thought he would be a great candidate to have on my podcast. So, Tim, thanks a bunch for being on here, man. I really appreciate it.
Oh, happy to take the time.
Well, you know what I thought we'd do to begin with? You know, you've got a really dynamite background, and I was thinking we'd start out just talk to you real quickly. You know, tell them about your military experience, and then how you wound up going where you went to school, and what you did while you were there. You were there for a long time, and then how you started Basal Smart Solutions. What led up to that?
So my career has sort of the weirdest trajectory ever in the history of trajectories. So I went, like most Gen X, I went to high school in the 80s, got out, had no idea what I wanted to do for a living. Everybody was becoming a lawyer or something. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be a somewhere between an architect or an archaeologist or zoologist or something that didn't involve offices. So my dad offered to send me to college, and I was like, oh, so I joined the Army, and my dad was like, hey, that's a good move for you. I was like, oh crap, I should have known right there, right? Tactical. But I had a very successful time in the Army. I was in for a little around 6 years. I had a knee injury that got me out in about early 1996. Went back to college. When I was trying to figure out what to major in, I had it narrowed down to two things: computer science or physics. And the way I got to those two was I was looking at average starting salary by major and unemployment rate by major. And I noticed the unemployment rate for both was really low, and the average starting salary was pretty good. So I was like, okay, that's a good mixture, right? So I was talking to my dad, who was a software engineer from the early 1960s until he retired in 2002. I said, Dad, which one of these do I pick? And he's like, well, physics is too hard. You'll never graduate. So the next day I became a physics major officially. Went to school here in Texas, but I went from my freshman year to my PhD in 6.5 years. It was actually pretty quick. Then I wound up at MIT at the Institute for Solar Nanotechnologies. I was there, and between there, I'm doing some classified work off and on, working with a bunch of people from the Department of Physics, Department of Material Science, and you take your pick. It was an interesting time. There's brilliant people there. And if you ever get a chance to work someplace like that, it's weird walking in, because you look around, you're like, okay, I know the names of all these people, and now all of a sudden, they're looking at me like I belong here, and you're scared because you've got these 7 Nobel laureates in the Department of Physics alone. You're like, how am I fitting here? Right? And then you realize after a while that they're just people like you are, but they're shockingly hardworking people. They're smart guys, yes. Some of them are brilliant, but they are really hardworking. I mean, that's a campus that you will find steep in people early in the morning, and they're there till late at night. Saturdays, it doesn't matter. There's always somebody around working on something, way past when everybody else would have gone home at other schools. So you see it as a place that's not just got smart people, but it's got smart people who just never quit. And the other thing you notice pretty quickly is that when a lot of universities, you'll see people have an idea, and you're like, oh, let's go discuss it and think, is this a good idea or something? And much you're like, you know what, let's just go try it. Right? Let's not talk about it. Let's just go try it. And they'll go back in the lab or in a simulation environment and try out whatever it was to see if it works. Because who knows, right? Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, but I've been a physicist long enough now to know that if you sit down with a group of us for any length of time, we can talk you out of anything being possible. They're like, yep, won't work for these 27 reasons. Well, why not just go try it, right? So they're the try it group. And as a result, 90 experiments fail, but every once in a while you get that one that comes out and you're like, okay, that's cool, right? And it spins into something new. I left there. I was over at Raytheon for a while. I worked on the Patriot missile program, on the upgrade to that. I worked on over the horizon radar, some of their advanced technologies, some classified stuff. Left there, I became independent because I realized I got tired of snow and ice up in New England. So I decided moving to Texas was a brilliant idea because I'm actually from the area. I'm from Ohio, but I lived here for a long time when I was a kid. Moved back here, sort of became independent as a consultant for a couple of years, and then formed a company called Basal Smart Solutions, where we do a number of things. We do custom apps for people, but mostly a lot of our stuff is focused around artificial intelligence and machine learning. Partially because physicists have done that stuff for 20 years, but we're the only ones that have powerful enough computing centers to really pull it off. Now, with the advent of cloud computing, it's kind of become popular, right? So it's sort of like, okay, now take all that stuff you used to do in the lab and make it work for other people, right? So we're trying to get it out of the lab and go make it work for everybody else.
Cool.
So that's kind of how I got where I am.
And so, how did you kind of get interested in AI to begin with? What drew you to that? Just part of being in the physics community?
Yeah, it's part of being in the physics community because you get these data sets. Like nobody in the physics community runs into a lab and runs an experiment and writes data down on a lab notebook. That doesn't work anymore, right? So computers take all the data and you wind up with these data sets that are just massive. So you wind up getting really good at statistics, and you wind up getting really good at taking massive piles of data and making sense out of them. And the only way to really do that is to build some kind of a statistical model, which is kind of what AI is based on. So if you want to find some people that are really good at stats, you get chemists, physicists, some theoretical mathematicians, and a few others, because it's kind of what we've done forever, right? Is that sort of work. And I always had this interest in nonlinear dynamics, which is kind of a chaos theory thing that's basically built on stats. So it just sort of was a nice fit. And when it started kind of coming out of the lab into the real world, um, a lot of what we call statistics or predictive analytics, trying to say, okay, look, you got a data set and it's here. Where's it going to go, right? Well, that's now all called artificial intelligence. It kind of got lumped in with it. So it was really just taking the skills I have and saying, hey, look, I don't want to work for a university anymore. Where can I go and actually get a real paycheck instead of the university-sized paycheck?
Yeah.
That's sort of where it wound up. Starting Basal Smart Solutions was actually based around an idea I had to take all the data coming out of social media and being able to predict where hashtags are going to go. And can you get the right hashtags on a post to have it much more visible so that you don't have just the clickbait post showing up as the number one thing to go look at, right? Can you get beyond ooh, click here to see this, and then the article doesn't really tell you what you want to see. So can you get a person who's actually just trying to put out a message that people actually want to see, that isn't clickbait, that doesn't have, lots of pictures on it that your kids shouldn't see? How do you get those things to percolate to the surface? So we started this company and built a tool that actually does that. And along the way, we helped other clients with stuff. We do other bits and pieces of work, but basically it's all based around that same AI, machine learning, and predictive analytic tool. We've even taken that same tool and started to feed it information coming out of the tail end of World War II, when nobody was quite sure where everything went. Like the Germans kind of pillaged most of the world. Like where did the artwork go? Where did the gold go? Where did Hitler really live? How did Himmler get where everyone? So we started to feed that tool some of that information, and we're actually starting to look at a few things like, okay, we're kind of predicting, okay, where did the artwork get hidden? Well, lo and behold, if the algorithm's starting to predict some of that stuff, and it's like, well, they actually found some of it there about 10 years ago. Well, it was neat because the algorithm's trying to say, oh, go look here. And there's still a bunch of missing stuff. So we're hoping that we could take some of the still missing ones and feed it into the algorithm and have it pop out where it might be hiding. After 80 years, it may not still be there anymore. But where was it originally is the big question. So
yeah, that's an interesting application of AI. Very.
well, there's also a lot of misinformation out there, and that's what AI is really. One of the things AI can get really good at is saying, okay, look, you've got this data set and everything seems to fit in line, but you've got these outliers here. What are the outliers? And if you go look at them and you can prove those outliers were just, misinformation or bad information or garbage, you can figure out how to throw them out of your data set pretty fast. But when you look at data sets that are like petabytes in size, no human's going to be able to go through that. So you need a tool to really kind of pull it apart and say, okay, what's the real stuff? What's the fake stuff? Because we're all tired of news reports that are just based on hearsay, right? So can you get an AI routine to go through and just pick apart and say, okay, what's reality and what's not, and have it rate it like 0 to 10, right? Is this accurate? Is this not accurate? What's it look like? And there's too much of it being generated for that to be a human task. That has to be a machine task to go through and say, okay, good, bad, I don't know, have a human look and decide, right? That kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because right now, we're mostly using AI to augment human performance. AI does certain things much better than humans can do them, and certainly processing massive amounts of data and coming to some realistic conclusions is one of the things that AI does well. But it's going to be interesting to see as we continue to evolve with AI, how much of normal human activity AI begins to take over.
I was reading some reports about, I mean, human activity is one thing, but and AI. So I see all these things like in Hollywood, there's a whole writer strike and actor strike about AI usage for different things. And AI will never be able to be creative, right? It's not in its world. It's not in that world. Somebody has to tell the AI what to go build, right? So some creative type has to be behind the scenes using it. What
Right.
AI will do, and this is where there's a Harvard survey, there's one out of Stanford, Rice, a few other places. They're starting to look at what white collar jobs and blue collar jobs is AI really going to just come in and decimate, and how quickly. And I'm seeing numbers anywhere between sort of 30 and 55% of the entire workforce can be replaced by an AI in the next sort of 3 to 5 years. So it lends itself to the question of, that's a lot of people, right? I mean,
It
that's a
is.
whole lot of people out of work, and you got more than that living paycheck to paycheck. So where do you go with this, right? Because AI is a whole lot cheaper, and if you're a company, you started a company to make money, and people are expensive. So, it lends itself to the question of, do you trust the AI? Well, you're not really going to have much of a choice, because Netflix uses it, Walmart uses it, and they've been using it forever to kind of
Amazon.
refill shelves or recommend movies or figure out trends. It's out there, right? Banks have been using it for security forever. And you don't realize you're using it because, well, my bank popped a fraud alert. Well, no human was looking at your credit card swipe and instantly popped a fraud alert.
Exactly right.
It can't
Yeah.
do that, right?
Right.
It was an AI that said, "Oh, out of pattern, call them," right? And it saved me a couple of times, right? And I don't think people mind that particular application. There's one that works, right? And it saves people money. Um, but now all of a sudden, the people that worked at the call center that took the calls that say, "Hey, look, I'm going to dispute this charge," don't have as much work to do, so you don't need as many of them, right? So we put some people out of work. Well, that trend's going to continue. You're going to see 30, 50, maybe even more of the workforce that doesn't need to be there anymore. So what does that do? I mean, how do you deal with that big of a paradigm shift? And that's a political question I don't really have the answer to, but
Yeah.
it's like, how do you deal with it? Well, if you're an employee, you don't necessarily have to, be what I do with AI, which is integrate it and create new ones, but learning how to use it would be a really good idea. Right?
Yeah. Well, I was reading an article the other day, and this just stuck in my mind as reality is that AI is not going to take your job. A human that knows how to effectively use AI is going to take your job. And I think that's reality. I mean, I think you can take one person and do the job of many if that person's very good at using AI. And I think the real danger to jobs is AI augmented humans. And
Yeah.
it's coming, and it's coming fast. It's interesting. You've been around technology for a long time, and so have I. I mean, I've been doing technology for a living for 45 years, and throughout my career, there have always been technologies that took jobs. Every time you automated something new, you were potentially impacting somebody that had been doing that manually for a long time. And but it's interesting. People always seem to find new jobs, and sometimes it took retraining. But my gut feel is that what AI is going to do is going to make all of us better. It's going to make society better. It's going to make companies more profitable. It's going to make countries run better. It's just going to provide more information to everybody. And it'll be interesting to see how we handle the job situation with people potentially losing a job that they spent their whole career doing. And I think it is inevitable, certainly in some roles. And it's going to be very interesting to watch the whole thing. I mean, I'm sure you and I are going to talk about this and on this podcast again in not too distant futures. It starts to evolve more. I think all of us are going to be watching it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's it's going to evolve. It's going to be different than it is. I get every once in a while somebody asks me, well, what about Skynet? Like, you know what? Military systems are completely different. They're very closed loop. They doesn't have access to Chat GPT. It's not calling the shots over there. So
That's right.
I
Yeah.
wouldn't be too worried about that right now. If you are worried about that, you've got deeper problems than what
Well,
might be.
yeah, I think people are missing one fundamental thing is they're worried about AI becoming so creative that it teams up with other AI and it cracks your security system. But what people don't realize is that software security companies have been using AI for some time now. And so, yeah, somebody may come up with AI to attack your system, but the people that are providing the protection for your systems, they've been using AI for a long time.
Well, I mean, you've been in computer security. I've been around it forever. Somebody who uses a 12-digit pass or 12-character password that's randomly assigned, that memorizes it, nobody's ever going to break their stuff. It's when people use my kid and
Yeah.
my kid's first name and their birthday, or I found somebody the other day who wanted me to debug their system, and their password was, I'm not making this up, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9. And
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
like, really? It's those kind of things. Humans are the weak link, right?
They are always.
That's really the biggest problem. So it's not. I mean, 128-bit, 256-bit security, the blockchain level stuff. You're not getting through frontline security, no matter how hard you try.
Yeah, I
It
agree.
it's like
It's
you take the German Enigma machines in World War II, right? So the only way those got broken during World War II was yeah, Turing built a machine, but the machine wasn't working until they realized everywhere in everything was some version of Heil Hitler. And then they used that to say, okay, in this code somewhere is Heil Hitler. All we have to do is find it, right? And they used that to crack the code. Well,
well, that's interesting. I wasn't aware of that. That's very interesting.
yeah, there's a whole movie about it that was, but yeah, if it wasn't for the Germans putting Heil Hitler in every message, they would have never cracked it. And because of
So,
that, they cracked it pretty fast. So
well, when you look back at historically, I mean, when we first started having, when we had mainframes, security was, there was less cracking going on because you couldn't come in from the outside, and the cracking that did happen, it happened because somebody in the company, you know, basically worked with an outsider. They provided passwords and access and stuff like that. When we started to get into distributed systems, and everybody had a PC on their desktop, and then we got into a situation where people couldn't remember their passwords, so they were writing it down and putting it under their keyboard. And
yeah, sticky notes. Yeah.
yeah, I worked for a company where we had somebody coming into our building and they were dressed in a suit. This is back in the days when everybody wore suits to work, but he looked just like one of us. He was dressed in a suit, a white shirt, a tie. He was dressed real nice. He would come up in the elevator and he would surf into the building behind people. And then he would walk around the desks picking up the keyboards looking for passwords. He was also stealing women's wallets out of their purses. But, he was, I think, primarily there to get passwords to try to crack the system. And
Yeah.
it's always, there have been so many tricks for so long that people have tried. It's human engineering, man. I mean, just getting in through a human. And I think it's still the most prevalent way that people break in, and I think it will be for a long time because again, AI. If you know if you build something, you can count on that the security systems have something in place to check it. I mean, they're going to get it based on outliers. They're going to find something about your attack that is a signature, and they're going to catch
Yeah, it's like the only real way around it is going to be some kind of biometric, beyond fingerprint, right? I mean, there's been fingerprints for a while, but somebody's going to come up with a biometric that's cheap enough that people are actually going to use it. Because somebody asked me the other day, they wanted a biometric that did retinal scans, and it actually is out there, but it's like $250 per PC or something. It's like, so yeah,
it.
I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, most people want a laptop that's 400 or 500 bucks. You're not going to add 250 to that for everybody and get away with it, right? So, I mean, another 250 on my iPad is a non-starter, right? I mean, I'm already
Oh
paying
yeah.
whatever those things are. So,
I
yeah,
use the fingerprint thing on mine, to get in,
uh,
and it's biometric. It definitely recognizes my fingerprint. But over time, you're seeing companies already where you're entering your password. You have to log back in, and they're sending you a verification code. So it's already starting to get more complex.
oh, that works pretty well. The other day, I caught one. My two sons look very similar, and they were kind of laughing that. they could actually open each other's iPhones with facial recognition.
Oh,
So I contacted
that's
Apple
awesome.
and I was like, really? You guys do this? I'm like, did you know this? And Apple's like, yeah, with siblings, that's actually kind of not uncommon, especially if they're under the age of 18, right? Because as you get over the age of 18, everything changes a little bit body wise. So, and they were, gosh, I think they were 10 and 8 at the time. So, they were pretty young still. They're a little bit older now. I don't know if it still works, but at the time it was kind of like Apple's like, yeah, we know. So it's but that kind of stuff. I mean, siblings breaking into each other, you're never going to be able to fix that. But I just found it interesting that that actually could happen. And for anybody who's now going, well, yeah, but how about if I just have a picture of the person? Try it. I dare you. It's not going to work that well. The systems are pretty good at weeding that one out because it's 2-dimensional instead of three. It jacks everything up. So the systems are getting better, but security is going to be a pain. And without AI, you're not going to know it. So imagine, like,
Right.
you've got this handy dandy little mobile device you carry with you everywhere that you're willing to access your email, your bank, your credit card, everything from. If that wasn't highly secure, how much of a field day could I have sitting in Starbucks yanking everybody's information out of the airwaves, right? I mean,
Boy, no kidding.
it is not hard for me to pick up your Bluetooth signal and grab things coming out of your phone without being paired to it. It's not hard, right? But all the encryption makes it impossible for me to figure out what the hell you're accessing and when. That's why it exists, right? So the security is not bad, but when people get in the mix, man, it's just a big mess. So
It's going to be interesting as we move further and further to edge processing, where we have AI on the edge of the enterprise, and you have really intelligent devices out there, potentially even devices that can talk to you, while you're working. Um, how much those edge devices are going to become. I mean, they're an access point to your system. If they can log into your Wi-Fi, they can get in. And, people are going to probably try to crack those edge devices using things like Bluetooth. You know,
well, it's the weak link, right? Because
it is.
like now I can now share my Wi-Fi password if you're close to me, so I don't have to go read it off the router, right? I can actually just share it straight to your phone. Um, and that's great and that's convenient, but at some point somebody's going to kind of, figure out a way around that. And it's always going into weak link, and the weak link is always a human and convenience,
Yep.
right? And that's where AI comes into play. It's trying to take that weak link and fix it so that everything still remains secure. And I get it. Somebody's like, well, privacy, and now the AI knows everything. Well, yeah, the AI knows your buying patterns. The AI at Netflix knows what you watch, right? The AI at Amazon knows what you like to buy. Because my daughter likes Squishmallows. I get more ads for Squishmallows than any 50-year-old man should ever possibly get, right? But uh,
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
uh, those sorts of AIs are out there, and they really do make our lives better, right? Because now I don't have to look at ads for things I'm not interested in. Whereas at the dawn of the internet, you got ads for whatever they happen to pay for on that particular case. If you watch TV just 15, 20 years ago, before all the streaming services, the ads weren't targeted. It was a shotgun approach. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, you're going to look at an ad for Pepto-Bismol whether or not you like it, right? And now that will come up if you did, if you're kind of interested in it. And people that are worried about privacy and security, well, my first question, and I get this all the time, people, because I have a social media company, everybody's like, well, what about security? What about privacy? I'm like, you posted it on Facebook. I mean, if you're putting something out there on social media, I think you've kissed privacy and security goodbye, right?
Oh
So,
yeah. No
like,
question.
I live in Frisco, Texas, right? And I won't say who, but I used to live in the high rise over at the Star and right by the Cowboys practice field, and there were some cheerleaders that lived in the building, and some very attractive women that lived there. And one of them walked up to me one day and goes, so I'm on Instagram and I posted my picture of myself out someplace, and then all these creepy guys showed up. How do I stop that? I'm like, well,
Yeah.
don't post it on Instagram while you're still there. She's like, well, how
Exactly
do I
right.
stop the creepy guys from following me? I'm like, okay. Bear with me a moment. Okay. While you're still at the facility, don't post a picture of yourself. The creepy guys won't go to that bar.
Sure. Bill.
Hey, I just left here. Bam, send it out, right? That's fine.
It's either that or she's got to get good at taking, even if you can kind of disguise where you are based on the background of your pictures, they can find you. You know, your photograph, unless you take it off there, it'll have GPS coordinates on
Oh, these people were actually tagging the place they were at in their post. It
it.
just
Yeah. Okay.
it's
Well,
like
you know,
I'm over here.
I think one thing that I've noticed too on social media, I've seen it on Facebook, where people will be on vacation and they're posting pictures up while they're on
That's
vacation. You know, it's like a giant
my house is
invitation for
empty.
some, yeah, somebody to show up at your house because they know you're not home.
That's the other thing AI can actually help solve in a way because everybody's got Ring doorbell now, right? And I've had it. I'm sure everybody, lots of people do. But that thing goes off if a squirrel walks across your front yard in the wrong way, right? So
Oh yeah,
AI is now getting good enough to tell the difference between a dog, a cat, and a squirrel and a human, right? And if you put that technology into Ring or into whatever the Ring competitor is, and say, okay, I can now tell the difference when it's a human and a dog that ran across my front yard, and it's only going to annoy me when it's a human. Okay, that's probably worth. That's an AI worth having.
I agree.
Um,
I agree.
you know, so it can solve that problem because lock up your house and leave on vacation. Well, we did that in the '80s, and there were a lot of houses that got broken into when people were gone. It's just the way it worked. And yeah, okay, yeah, you had a security system that would call the police, and they might come out, but it was a big problem in some neighborhoods, not in others. I mean, my house was never broken into when I was a kid, but it did happen. Well, now with Ring and cameras everywhere, it's a lot more complicated thing to do. But if you're telling people you're on vacation and people stop checking their Ring stuff, it's a little easier.
You
Or
bet.
just
Exactly. Yeah,
period
exactly
has
right.
gotten
Well,
tighter. But
there's just some common sense things like that. You know, I
yeah,
mean, you know, don't announce where you are on social media. People follow it. You know, I mean,
exactly.
well,
And
go
that's
ahead.
another AI tool. I mean, so back to AI for a minute. I mean, everybody's worried about AI, and from the bigger picture, like let's get back to that topic for a minute.
Yeah.
I think you see a lot of companies coming in with these promises that, hey, look, we're going to boil the ocean. We're going to fix every problem you ever had with AI. I've got an AI that can detect cancer and tell you when you need to sneeze and tell you 45 minutes before you need to take an aspirin, right? Or 4 hours before you're going to have a heart attack. All those are great applications and all those are possible. But what you're going to see first are very niche applications. You're going to see companies solving one problem at a time that'll eventually add up to something great. And what you say is true. It's like it will solve a lot of problems for people, and I think it will actually involve an extended lifespan because I've got this nice iWatch here that tracks all kinds of biometric stuff, and people use it to tell how long they've walked, how far have they done, how many steps have they taken, have they walked 2 miles a day or 6 miles a day. Well, it can also detect your heartbeat and all kinds of other things. It's getting dangerously close to being able to take a pretty decent EKG, and if it can do that on a continuous basis and give early warning when you're having a very minor heart attack, that's huge,
It is.
right?
You know, back in the age when we were doing, RFID and GPS and all that, you know, we were looking at was there a market? And this was, really a lot of the AI that we're talking about, this super capable AI, have kind of come to market in the last 5 years. You know, before that, we didn't have enough data. We didn't have machines that were fast enough. I mean, it's evolving very quickly. Um, but we were thinking about potentially building a device. You know, all the baby boomers, the people in my generation, they're all getting older, and so some kind of a health monitoring device, but we weren't there. Now we've got them. And the kind of the next step, since these devices are already monitoring people's health, is to build a service that monitors their health via their watch. There's no reason why you can't connect that to a service that would monitor, especially if you have existing health problems. And that way, you were talking about if you're having a minor heart attack, maybe you don't even know you're having it. It's going to detect it, and it's going to, it can alert somebody to your location, exactly what your EKG reading is at that point in time. I mean, the service might be so good that they would call you and tell you you need to go to the nearest hospital. You're having an event. And I think those
Yeah,
kinds of services are going to crop up here pretty quick.
yeah. I don't think that's even 3 years out. I think that's more of there's probably somebody who's got that. They just have to get it approved by some medical group to get it kind of spun out. But the sensor capability is there. I mean, there's
You
people.
bet.
Somebody was showing me a ring they wore that was like a $200 ring, that monitors everything from blood pressure to, all kinds of stuff, apparently reasonably accurately. But it's still in the beta test phase. But it was a fairly decorative kind of rig, but it had tons of capabilities. I think it was actually showed up on a Showtime show called Billions too. So those things are not, that was not fiction. That was actually real. That stuff exists up in Silicon
Yeah.
Valley someplace. But you can, get kind of early warning. And I got some friends in the medical space, and they're like, uh, no, during COVID, nobody showed up at the hospital with a minor heart attack. They were all severe. And still to this day, nobody shows up with a minor heart attack. You wait till the last second. Well,
Yeah.
medical technology has progressed enough that if you're, at my age group, I'm 51. Um, I don't have any health problems, but my dad did, right? So he was in his 50s when he had a stroke that affected the rest of his life. He lived to be in his mid 70s.
Yeah. Sorry to
But
hear that.
had he caught that early on, he could have fixed it, but they didn't catch it until later. Well, now my generation has no excuse, right? We can catch this stuff instantaneously. And the earlier you catch it, the more medical technology has progressed to the point where they can kind of fix everything, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
can go in and replace arteries, you can put in
I know,
stents,
it's
you could do things
incredible.
you've never been able to do before, right? And if they could, I'm convinced also if they would actually let us use stem cells on a more regular basis, you could actually expand people's effective lifespans and keep their brain intact a lot longer.
I agree with
Uh,
you.
but,
I agree.
but that's a
I
whole
think
discussion
I
for
think
another
that's
podcast.
coming. I mean, the difficulties of technological advances is that a lot of times society doesn't advance as quickly as the technology is, and there's not an acceptance, even though what's being proposed could significantly improve our lives. And that's an instance right there where, you know, there obviously we're getting into a political discussion here about stem cells. I don't necessarily want to go there, but I agree with you wholeheartedly that when there are technologies out there that can help us live a lot longer, we have to take a hard look at it. And they're starting to be able to do things with your own blood that they only could do with stem cells before. And I'm very bullish on that technology.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's. Let's go back to AI for a second. It's like with these things around, and an AI tool to kind of help pull them out. It actually does also lower your overall medical costs, right? Because what's the cost of dealing with a minor heart attack versus a major one, right? So, what
Agreed.
does that do to your monthly insurance bill? What does that do? You go down the pipeline of what all that does for you. It does great things. So, like, take another AI application that people see and they don't realize they're using AI. Well, there's a lot of modern cars that now have brake sensors, right? If you get too close to the car in front of you, your car will stop you, right? It will stop
Yeah.
you from having that accident. Well, that's not, I mean, okay, it's not, some people are like, oh, it's not a true AI. Okay, great. It's not a true AI. However,
It is.
it actually
It,
is a very niche application of an AI because the system has to know how heavy the car is, how many people are in it, how fast am I going, how much distance do I have. It has to do a whole lot of calculations really quick to go off and say, I need to stop you, right? And here's how long I have to do it. And oh, I better stop now, right? It really does have to do a whole lot of work to figure that out. And we don't think about it, but sure enough, how many accidents has it stopped, right? I mean, I'm
yeah.
sure it's more than one.
Well, and I think that when you look at that, what you said earlier is absolutely true. Right now, the entire industry is narrow AI. And narrow AI means you're solving a specific problem. When you start to get into things like Chat GPT and Bard and autonomous vehicles, you're starting to edge over into that melded AI where you're using a number of different algorithms, and certainly like with the autonomous vehicle, you're using a lot of different sensors, and you're using sensor fusion to kind of fuse those measurements together where they have more meaning to a specific AI, intelligence, like what you're putting in the car. And it's relatively simple. When you look at each of the sensors and the types of AI you're doing on each sensor, but when you start to put those together, it starts to become a level of intelligence that's getting to be a lot more interesting. And
Yeah.
it sort of bodes for the future where things are headed, where, I think it's a lot more possible that people realize for us to have somebody standing next to us who's basically a robot. And yes, they're not as fluid and as an imaginative. They can't do all the things a human can do, but they're still going to be pretty impressive. And
Yeah. I mean, And I think people also like to, you know, people are afraid of what they don't understand, right? And that's why I think AI is kind of causing a lot of fear. But if you look at it another way, I'm 51, right? My dad was a software engineer, so I'm a little bit different than most people my age. But my first computer at home was a TRS-80 Model 1, right? In my
Oh, it,
lifetime, we went from 2K of memory and an audio cassette for storage to an iPhone that has more computer capacity than the Apollo 11 command module that went to the moon and back,
no, it's
right?
incredible. What we carry around in our hands every day is more powerful than a football field full of mainframes back in the, or, back in the mid '70s. I mean, it's just incredible what you have in your fingertips.
Yeah. So I look at it like, look, you like the computers we've built, right? Everybody thinks they're great, right? Some people are like, oh, we need to get rid of them unless we can. Yeah, okay, right. Yeah. Everybody likes the computers we have. The internet is here to stay. It's not going away. But don't be afraid of that next generation. Learn to use it. Don't run away from it. And if you learn to use it, you'll be in control of it. If you're in control of it, you don't have to worry about Skynet. Right? So it
I
is what
agree.
it is. And like everybody who's talking like the writer strike, you have this whole big argument about that, and ChatGPT and Bard and deep fakes and whatever. Okay, I get it. We can make Tom Hanks live forever and be in movies until the end of time. Got it. However, somebody has
Yeah.
to be the creative one that tells the AI, hey, write me a story about, and give it 27 prompts. I've played with ChatGPT, Bard, probably all the current ones.
Me
And if
too.
you don't prompt it properly, you get back garbage,
That's
right?
right. And
So
sometimes
what
you have
it,
to prompt it 2 or 3 times to get exactly what you're looking for.
yeah, and is it going to replace artists? No. Is it going to allow me to come up with a really quick graphic if I need one for a PowerPoint presentation? Yeah, but it's not going to be art. Like hanging in my house, I have several watercolors that are Salvador Dali, right? So, um, fantastic artist. I could prompt the thing all day long to do a salvage to do something like that. It takes a creative type to actually come up with the idea to do it. Now, what I think AI will do is it'll separate the truly talented artists and creative types from those that are not quite as good. And I don't want to criticize artists, but there's a difference between Holiday in art and the stuff hanging in the loop, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But will it take somebody who may not have the hand skills but is artistic enough to really prompt something to produce something that's loop quality? Yeah, maybe that's different. Maybe not everybody has the motor skills of Leonardo da Vinci, but they have the mindset to actually do it. It'll help those people who don't have the mindset be able to produce that same level of thing. But you've got to be creative and you got to have the concept, you got to have the idea. Otherwise, the AI has no idea what to do.
Yeah,
It's
no, that's exactly right. And people don't realize that that's just where we are today. I mean, it's going to take a long time, in my opinion, to the term for it is artificial general intelligence, and that's like data on Star Trek or HAL, the computer from 2001: A Space Odyssey. You know, we're headed towards that, and I think if you talk to a lot of the people that are out there and the big companies that are pursuing AGI, like you know Elon Musk, or the people at Google, the people at Amazon, the people at Microsoft, at IBM, all of them are going to tell you that it's probably closer than we all realize. And not knowing everything those guys know, I get that, but I also recognize that we're not there yet. I mean, and while it's progressing quickly, there are a lot of nuances about human behavior that it's going to take time to build AI that can master those nuances. So I think we're a ways off of having artificial general intelligence, but I sure am excited at the possibility. I still would like to see it in my lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, I think you will start to see some of that, but I think you're at least 20 years out. I don't
Yeah,
know that
I agree.
it's.
Well, I think what people too, they're afraid. When you watch what people talk about on the news and everything, there's a lot of angst out there about AI. And oh my God, you were just talking about this earlier, that it's going to take over the world. But we're a long way from that. And everything develops in phases. It takes time, and you're going to start to see things, okay? And you're going to start to see them in products that are offered to you to buy.
Mhm.
Because if people don't build things for free. They build things to make money. And so
Yeah,
if they're building something in artificial general intelligence that we can all make use of, believe me, they're going to find a way to offer it to us. And so you'll
yeah,
start to see the signs of AGI before we actually get, full blown AGI. It'll evolve over a period of time. It'll get better and better. I tell you too that I'm not really uh, that uptight about that whole thing. About that AI is going to take over the world. I mean, there always have been people that wrung their hands around technology. We had the year 2000. After it was over, everybody scoffed and said the year 2000 was not a real event. But the only reason it wasn't a real event because the world is full of highly competent IT people that fix the problems. It could have been an absolute nightmare. And I think you'll see on the AI side, people will be smart about what they're doing. Will there be some bad actors out there? Yeah, there will. But by the time they create something that's really damaging, we'll probably have mitigating AI that can stop it. So, it's going to be interesting to watch it develop and see what the bad guys are going to use AI for, and are the good guys going to stay far enough ahead of them to mitigate the damage.
Oh, I think there'll be some back and forth, right? There'll be the bad guys will get ahead a little bit, and then the good guys will catch up and pass them, and it'll swing a bit both directions. It's almost unavoidable that it goes that way, but I don't think it's something that people need to invoke mass fear on. If you want something to be truly afraid of, you go look at the condition of the power grid around the country and scream.
Yeah, exactly right. Or our bridges. Our bridges are aging really quickly. I mean, there's a lot of things that we need to spend money on. I wanted to ask you too. I have to ask you this. I know you've written three books, and they're interesting subjects. And I've got one of them. I hadn't started reading yet, but I'll read all three of them here very quickly. And I'm just curious, how did you come up with the idea for each of those books? And then what's the process you went through to actually write them?
So, I got started. I hadn't even thought about writing a book until at the time I was working on nuclear sensors to detect smuggled nuclear material. A long time ago, when I was still affiliated with MIT, and a friend of mine knew a guy named David Baldacci who's written a bunch of novels and probably sold 300 or 400 million copies. And he was writing a book called Zero Day that had a nuclear weapon in it. And he uses a lot of subject matter experts to kind of proofread paragraph chapters before he puts them out. And somehow it wound up at me that, hey, can you go check it out and see if this is accurate or not? And I had a little back and forth with the author, who's a great guy. And I'm in the acknowledgments to the book, which I thought was really cool of him to put me in there.
Very cool.
But I saw part of his process, and I'm like, I could do this. And he's like, look, dude, I was a lawyer before this. Right, so he went from lawyer to novelist. And I had the idea, and he's like, well, just write what you know. And he lived in D.C., so most of his books are D.C. centric, and they have lawyers and Secret Service, and it's kind of his world. So I was like, okay, well, I was in the Army. I'm a scientist. I kind of went with sci-fi action thrillers. I'm like, that's my world. So the first one, The Last World War, Volume 1, is a book about what happens if certain nefarious actors get a hold of some nuclear weapons and actually build devices out of them. And what can they do with those devices? Because it's not like 1945, right? Get them on locations, not hard. And the reason we build sensors now to detect these things is because they're small enough, even in 1945 sense, because of modern shipping and logistics. You could FedEx one of them, and with a nuke, you don't have to get it right on target. You don't have to send it to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. You can send it to 1500 Pennsylvania Avenue and have it detonate, and it won't matter, right? They're big enough to do that, and small enough to ship FedEx, right? So the concept was, what happens if somebody had 5 of them, and where would they put them? And I got to that number because of a bunch of different junk, but it was kind of, if you looked at Iran's capabilities at the times, I'm like, what would Iran have? Could they have enough to do it? The odds are even all the unclassified stuff said, they might have enough material to do 4 or 5. So I'm like, okay, 5, right? If I had 5 nuclear weapons, where would I put them to cause the most havoc and make sure that the United States and our allies couldn't really respond in an effective fashion? So I said, okay. And I just played that out, and it kind of became a novel. I co-authored it with a guy named Mike Garst, who is a former combat medic who did tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. So some of the injuries are quite grotesque. And I was really happy with the fact that an ER nurse told me it was gross and disgusting in one section. She was like, that was fantastic. I was like, is that bad? She's like, no, it was great. I was like, okay, cool. So the
Yeah, there's going
nuclear
to be
stuff
some
was,
nasty things that happen if that ever, if it, I mean,
oh,
it's
it's
warfare,
disgusting.
really.
Yeah. So I dropped two nukes in the United States. I dropped a couple over in the Middle East. And I said, okay, let's play that out. And my question was, at least in my head, was would the U.S. respond with nukes? And I've got a lot of criticism for the fact that I was like, I don't really think they would. Some presidents we've had would, some wouldn't. But if we knew the enemy had used their entire nuclear arsenal, would we respond in a nuclear fashion? And my answer is probably not, because we'd wipe out a lot of civilians. And I looked through the last sort of several presidents, and this I wrote it before Trump, and my answer was Reagan, maybe, right? But if you look post Reagan, you go down the list of people who've been president. I'm not sure any of them, with the exception of Trump, would have launched a nuke in response if they knew the enemy had nothing else left in their nuclear arsenal. Right? If they
Yeah.
were sure of that, would they have responded in a nuclear fashion? And some people are like, of course they would. I'm like,
Yeah, I think it would come down to the intelligence at the time. What do you know, and and what is it? What would it take for us to militarily go over there and take out the bad actors? In other
yeah.
words, take out their
Could we do
central
it?
government.
Yeah. Could we do it without nuclear weapons? And if there was a way
Yep,
to do it without nukes, I think we would do that, even today. And then
I
the
think I
second one,
agree. And air
yeah,
power is the biggest reason. We can pretty much dominate anybody with air power, and we probably would utilize that and
you'd have to.
basically just militarily overwhelm them.
You'd have to. But the other trouble in the second book, the second part of that, and I wrote it pre-COVID. I was like, okay, what other military nightmares are out there? And I was like, okay, biological. And I wrote that book pre-COVID, and then it came out right as COVID was starting. It was like, oh, he just ripped off COVID. I'm like, actually, I was working on it like a year before that. So the second one's all biological and some more nuclear. And if there's ever a third one, it'll be a little weirder. But those two books I thought were pretty good, and they've done well. They're both above 4 stars on Amazon with hundreds of reviews, and the people seem to like them. The new one, The Diocese Dilemma, I grew up Catholic, which leaves you with a lot of weird questions. Like, when you're a kid, and I'm not criticizing Catholics at all, but when you're a kid and you walk into a Catholic church and you see a dude nailed to a piece of wood, you have questions,
Yeah,
right? And then here's this guy I'm supposed to go in a closet and tell all my secrets to, right? And that I have more questions, right? So, and then you hear about all the problems the Catholic Church has had over the years, and I had more questions. So the Diocese Dilemma came out of just sort of those questions. It was, what happens if a Catholic priest was just frustrated with people not understanding what confession really means, and they're not really sorry for their sins. They just come in to confess and get a get out of jail free card. And well, what happens when they're not really repentant? And does he take the confessional and turn it into a kill box where he picks people that he's just going to go become a serial killer? And oh, by the way, he's a student of the Inquisition, and he goes kind of, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. He kind of takes that to an extreme. And again, I wrote that with the former combat medic, and I made the priest a member of a mafia family, because every mafia family seems to have a priest in the family. So,
well, back in the old days, they were Italian and Irish, and all the Irish were coming from Southern Ireland back in those days, which is all
yeah,
Catholic, and of course,
yeah,
all the Italians were Catholic. So
yeah. So I went with Italian, but his dad was a clear mafia member, and I researched it carefully with the way the mafia really works and how the origins of the mafia really came about, and all the Catholic Church stuff from when I was a kid. And my dad, before he was a software engineer, was actually studying to be a priest. So I grew up not just Catholic, but very, very Catholic. Um, but it lent itself to those questions, and so it kind of became this book called The Diocese Dilemma that was like, if a couple of things, right? If he's truly taking out truly bad guys, do the cops really want to catch him, right? Or
yeah,
do they kind of go with, well, he's taking out bad people, we'll investigate, but not real hard. And if he's a mafia family, nobody gonna tell him. The Catholic Church is notoriously tight-lipped anyway. How do you figure out who's doing it, right? If there's the
yeah,
only connection is they're Catholic, but if you set it in the Northeast, which is where I set the book, half the population is Catholic, right? So
yeah.
it kind of narrows it down to half the people in the area. And if the church figured out who it was, would they help cover it up, right? And
Yeah, that's
well,
really interesting concept. If it was a real high IQ guy and he understood how law enforcement finds serial killers, and he was good at avoiding them, he could be in business for a long time, and people would
yeah,
never suspect him because he was a priest.
yeah.
It's
And he's
the
got
whole
it. and he's got a dad who's in the mafia who might know a little bit about how to cover that sort of stuff up, right?
Oh
So,
yeah, certainly does. Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I look forward to reading that one too. Those are all good. Well,
I played that. I played that out,
so
and I've been an avid reader my whole life, so it sort of just lends itself to writing. And
well,
went that
one
way.
thing I wanted to ask about that, I mean, a lot of what you do is creativity based. It's just how your brain works. And you and I started having this conversation the other day about our educational system and is it really preparing people uh, to be creative in the way you need to be creative to use AI to maximize its usage. Do you have any ideas about what we could do with our educational system? Like I'm seeing STEM, or STEM or STEAM, centers in just about every major suburb of Dallas Fort Worth. They have these major STEM assistants. But what do you think they need to do to better prepare them on the creativity side?
So I've got kids who are middle school and down, right? So I've got a fifth grader, a sixth grader, and an eighth grader. So I'm in the heart of that stuff. And I could tell you that the STEAM centers are good because it gets kids over the hurdle of being afraid of science being too hard. The challenge is they don't leave any space for creativity. It's take this wire, plug it here, take this, plug it there. And they're not really explaining why you're doing that kind of stuff. It's just, follow the instructions and oh, look, this whiz bang thing happens. And nobody's really thinking about the process and what's going on behind the scenes. So I think two things need to happen. One, we need kids to, instead of memorizing their way through things, understand why they're doing something instead of just memorizing how to do it. I think that's a big difference. And the other thing is, I grew up in a time before there were 200 TV stations and 50 streaming services and 27,000 video games. And I'm not criticizing any of that. I think entertainment is a great thing. But I grew up, got a book sitting right here with paperback books everywhere. And when you were bored, well, you went and found a book because there really wasn't much else to do because your house had one TV. And if dad was watching TV, he picked what was on and you had no choice, right?
That's right. And you only
Uh,
had three channels to pick between back when I was a kid.
Maybe four, right? If you had Fox, but
Yeah, exactly.
somebody had to adjust the antennas carefully. But I think what we've done is overwhelmed ourselves with entertainment options such that we don't have to think about it anymore. Because when you read a book, you have to fill in those blanks for yourself. And I grew up reading sci-fi and adventure books and some mystery books, but everybody had Hardy Boys back then. I don't think anybody really reads it anymore, but mostly sci-fi and fantasy adventure books, and it lent itself to a lot of creativity just because I didn't have like you didn't go watch Lord of the Rings and have Peter Jackson explain to you exactly what all this looks like. You had to fill all that in for yourself.
Right.
And I find people that come into universities, because I worked at one for a long time, you know, it, people who come into universities who grew up reading or grew up with that creative center being fostered just as much as the academic memorization center are much better at science and engineering than people who just sort of grow up with, hey, memorize all this. And it's the difference in between, the people who come in prepared to actually be scientists actually be creatives and run projects versus people who are ready to take instructions and do what they're told, right?
Yeah, no,
So
I agree with that 100%.
you've got the creative ones always wind up in charge, right? So
Well, yeah, it's interesting too around AI. I mean, when we were growing up, we all took a lot of math. I mean, I didn't necessarily in high school, but when I got out, I took a lot of math, and uh, and back then I can remember thinking I'll never use this stuff. But now all of a sudden with AI, AI is essentially math. And you not only have to know how to do the math, but you have to know what the math is used for. In other words, you have to understand the mental concepts behind mathematical formulas. And the very best data scientists are really, really good at that.
it's like what's it telling you, right? So like on any given day, we use 17 different algorithms to kind of solve a problem. But if I don't understand exactly what the output is of one, and I try to feed it into another one that's expecting something different, you're going to get garbage out the other end, right? So you've really got to be careful exactly how you feed this data around. And you've got to truly understand not only the data itself, but what you're doing to it at every step along the way. You don't necessarily have to memorize how to do it all. You at least have to understand, though, the process you're going through to do something. So like I found out a long time ago. Yeah, I took a lot of math because I was a physics major. I got it. I went all the way through differential equations and some funky stuff nobody should ever have to do. But what it does
Yeah.
is it teaches you the power of those tools because the truly interesting problems are not solved with a pen and a piece of paper and saying, "Ooh, prove this equals this." Well, nobody cares, right? But the computational stuff that's not an exact solution is really important. And one thing I wish I'd known before, back when I was a student, is the subject nobody really likes all that much. Statistics is the most useful one on the planet,
Well, it
right?
is.
And the people who love to talk about statistics almost never understand what the hell it is they're actually talking about, right? Because I see it
That's
all the
funny.
time. It's like, oh, I'm going to put together a fantasy football team based on all these stats. I'm like, okay, do you really understand it, right? Because I got into a fantasy football league 3 years ago, and it was me, a couple of data scientists formed a team. We kind of got together and decided it. We were kind of up against, and this was fun. There was no money changing hands, but it was up against a couple of retired NFL players. And the data scientists beat the snot out of the retired NFL players because before we started the season, we built computer models based on how do we really do this right, right? And they were like, "Oh, that guy's good, that guy's good, that guy's good, that guy's good." Well, our computer models beat the guys who did this for a living.
Yeah. Well,
So,
it's interesting. Years ago they started using analytics really to put teams together. I mean, basketball teams, and they did it based on the characteristics of people's games. They needed to have a certain balance between offensive and defensive rebounds. They needed to have a certain percentage of scoring inside and outside, and so they were putting teams together. Now, baseball and football, everybody's using analytics to when you look at analytics, there's descriptive analytics, which is what happened, and then you have diagnostic analytics, which is why did it happen. When you get into prescriptive, which is, you know, what's going to happen, and I mean, into predictive, and then you get into prescriptive, which is how do I make it happen or how do I prevent it from happening? That's all AI.
yeah,
And so, when you look at it, those tools, it doesn't surprise me a bit that using science, I mean, you can't discount a coach's eye, but or a player's eye, but when you're doing something like that, you're team building, and that's really GM work. And GMs today, I think they have to be smart enough to use the math that's available and the systems like AI to help them make smart decisions. And if they're not, I think they're doing their team a disservice. I really do, and
yeah,
I think they're going
yeah,
to suffer as a result.
yeah. I mean, for years, certain teams in Dallas ignored analytics, and they went 8-8 for a whole bunch of seasons in a row, right? I'm
Yep.
leaving a name out of this one on purpose. So it's got, uh,
Yeah, and the analytics
but
was available for a number of those years,
yeah,
and now suddenly they're all over it, and I'm glad they are. I think it's going to help them. They've done a really good job in the last few years in the draft, incredibly good job, but I
yeah,
think this will help them be better. And
yeah,
it's very important. I think you know um, it's another one of those things though where you have to combine the science with experience and logic too, and I think that teams are getting better and better in doing that. And as a result, you're going to have teams that are almost built scientifically, and
yeah,
it's going to yield a better result. Uh,
yeah. I think it really is. I think you're going to see a whole lot of that kind of stuff down to, baseball teams have done it forever, so I can't really count them out. But yeah, it doesn't matter what sport it is. I think you're going to see that across the board. So the
it,
the the nerds of the world can finally find a job in athletics, right? So
yeah, exactly right. We're finally accepted. Um,
yeah, I
well,
think you're going to see a lot more. I think the next one you're going to see huge because you see a little bit of it now, but I think the next one that's going to be massive. I think you're going to see a lot of AI in the video gaming industry. And yes, I know there's some of it there now, but the AI that's there hasn't really evolved in the last 10 years. I mean, a little bit around the edges, but I think you're going to see a huge revolution in the gaming industry in the next sort of 3 to 4 years.
it's
And I think somebody's going to come in and just whale the snot out of it and sort of evolve everything out
I think they are
a much
too.
faster way.
Yeah, you can make it. You can make the game. It just boils down to it's the same thing we were talking about. That will all these things that are happening around AI will eventually drive us towards successfully creating AGI.
Mhm.
And then people can have a data living with them in their house.
Yeah,
That does things for them.
yeah,
And old people will be able to stay in their homes longer because they'll have really an android in the house doing things that they're no longer capable of doing. It's very exciting, the potential of it. But all these little things you're talking about like this, they're all going to contribute to it over time.
Yeah, and people pick on it because there's only one car company doing it, but sooner or later, and I don't think it's going to be 10 years, you're going to see a whole lot of self-driving cars. And people are like, oh, I don't want to take away your control. Like, you know what? That's cool. But quite frankly, I'm at an age where I'm like, you know what? If I have to go get in the car, it's a pain, and I'd much rather be able to sit there and read a book or do something while the car just gets me wherever
Absolutely.
I need to go. Right? I don't. I mean, yeah, is driving
Well,
fun? Sure, but there's a point when it's like it's not as much fun as it used to be.
Well, I would tell you, for years in Bodum, I had to drive back and forth to Houston every week. And,
Oof.
I was making that drive. And I'll tell you, I could have gotten so much more done if the car would have driven itself. I mean, I kept hoping for that high speed train. And truthfully,
Yep.
I'm about to start doing business in Houston again. And I'll be back and forth. And, the thing about it is, I've read a lot of articles and all of this, because we're talking about the future, what the future will bring. I think that it's probably realistic to believe that at some point in the future, none of us will own a car. A car will just show up and take you where you need to go. When you need to
Yeah.
go, you'll communicate, it'll show up, it'll take you there, and you're only paying, and it's going to actually be cheaper for everybody. There'll be fewer cars on the road because cars won't be sitting idle. They'll be used all the time.
Yep.
And it's a better concept. It's a better concept for a number of reasons. The cost, the expense to society for all the cars we put on the road, the maintenance on our highways. I mean, you could reduce that significantly if everybody was taking a Uber that was an autonomous vehicle.
And if they were all maintained properly, what does that do to the carbon footprint per car, right?
You
Because
bet,
yeah, I
absolutely.
I know everybody's like, oh, modern cars don't have as yeah, but that's assuming they're maintained properly, right? And I can't guarantee my neighbor's not an idiot and didn't change his oil for 30,000 miles or something, right?
Or,
So,
or he's
uh,
driving on tires that are 10 years old and the rubber's so old it's cracking. It happens
yeah,
all the time.
I have it all the time, right? So the carbon footprint of these things goes down dramatically if they're well maintained. And yeah, I know somebody's going to say something about lithium batteries being dangerous. I got it. I'm not sure lithium batteries are the right answer either. But I do know something's got to get us off internal combustion sooner or later. If for no other reason that there's a finite level of the amount of gasoline we can get right out of this planet. And yeah, okay, you can make it with corn, but you have to grow so much corn at that point to actually pull that off. It's not nearly as easy as it was. But so I think part of the answer is not going to just be, hey, let's get off of gasoline. Part of the answer is going to be, hey, let's figure out how to use that gasoline far more efficiently. And one
Agreed.
of the ways that's going to happen is by what you're saying is just cars sort of showing up when you need one instead of owning it. And I know a lot of millennials who for years did that kind of stuff. The statistics on there were a lot of millennials that did that kind of stuff for years, where they didn't own cars, they didn't have driver's licenses, they just took Uber everywhere, and that's cool. But sooner or later you have a family, and you can never predict when your 12-year-old is going to need you to go do something for him, right? So it
Yeah,
gets a little more difficult unless you
it
have
does.
mass numbers of Ubers. And yes, I know we have a lot of Ubers, but sometimes I don't have time to wait for a half hour while one gets to me.
Well, and what if you cut yourself really bad, like you cut your hand really bad and you need to go to the emergency room? You might need to go to the emergency room like right now, depending on the level
Yeah.
of bleeding. And so,
So it's like, there's a law of large numbers problem, right? It's like everybody's like, I get my company gets approached about this all the time, right? So we build custom software for people and they're like, oh, I want to build a new dating app. Everybody's got a new dating app idea and I get it and that's cool. But if you don't have millions of users, it's not going to work.
that's right.
Right?
Yeah.
So
Kind of the
building the
magic
app,
of it is that you're giving them, the bigger the potential audience, the better the
yeah.
selectivity.
Right. So it's like, get it. Building the app is not the hard part. If you come at me with, hey, build an app and you can barely afford to build the app, pack it in and go home because your marketing budget needs to be 10x what your development cost was, right?
Right.
Because you really need people to sign up for that thing fast, right? Otherwise, it is worthless. And it's going to just languish in the app store and not go anywhere. Um, but yeah, I think part of the, but I think back to the point was that with AI, I think you're going to see a lot of these things start to come down, and you're going to see a whole lot of changes, everything from self-driving cars to people living longer, and living longer, meaningful lives, right? I mean, living
Yeah.
longer. I mean, you can keep anybody alive forever on machines, but yeah, a meaningful life is the tough part, right? And how can we get further along than we used to? So
Well, a
I
lot of the
think
medical research that's being done today is actually being done with AI. And
Yeah.
I'm hoping that they find a cure for things like dementia. I mean, the quality of somebody's life as they age, and frankly, the length of their life can be dictated by whether or not they wind up having dementia in whatever form. And
Yeah.
if we could, if that's one I'd like to see us find a cure for.
That's the big one, right? I mean, cancer, if you catch it early, you can kind of, most forms of cancer, not all. If you catch it early, it's kind of treatable now. Um, and more cancer will be solved just with early treatments. Hypertension, you go down the list of everything. It can be fixed if you're willing to take the precautions to do it.
Yeah, it's just the
Um,
brain.
it's just the brain, right? Dementia, there's no known cure for, and okay, there's no known cure for narcissism either, but we'll figure that part out later. Uh, but I make that joke because somebody told me like, well, yeah, ChatGPT became, they were using ChatGPT to do something like it became narcissistic and perverted. I'm like, yeah, because it's trained on the internet, and a third of the internet is either narcissistic or perverted. So yeah, ChatGPT on occasion
Exactly
is going to
right.
be right, but we can't solve that problem yet. But I think AI is going to solve a whole bunch of this stuff, and it's going to
Me
do it
too.
much faster than people think it is, and it's going to impact kind of every part of our life. And we should probably leave it there because we've hit about an hour. But
Yeah.
I'd love to do this again with you sometime.
Yeah, I definitely
Uh,
would too. I mean, we're barely scratching the surface here, so we'll do it again soon.
exactly.
I mean, this is a really a teaching mechanism when it boils down. And I think we talked about a lot of subjects today that people have an interest in, and we're going to do it again soon. Okay.
Yep, we should.
Hey, thanks very much. I sure appreciate you doing my podcast, and I'll talk to you here shortly.
All right, no problem. You have a good
Take care.
day.
Bye bye.